rent, that savings would be gone in 4 months, and I'd have nothing left over for the basics they stopped providing. I write out different scenarios, but they all end the same way. There's no version where this works without me going hungry or losing my business equipment. The notebook pages blur a little because my eyes are watering, but I'm not crying. I'm just mad and scared and trying to figure out what to do. That night, I lie awake researching on my phone whether parents can legally charge their minor child rent. The answers are confusing and vary by state, but most sources say parents have a duty to provide basic support until 18. Some forums have people saying their parents charged them rent as teenagers and it was fine. Others say it's neglect if the parents aren't providing food and necessities. I find a legal aid website that says parents have to give kids shelter, food, clothing, medical care, and education. Charging rent might be okay if they're still providing all that other stuff. But my parents haven't bought me food in over a year. They haven't bought me clothes since I was 12. I screenshot everything that seems relevant and save it in a folder on my phone. Around 2 in the morning, I finally fall asleep with my phone still in my hand. When my alarm goes off, I feel exhausted and my eyes hurt from reading tiny text for hours. The next morning, I tell my parents I'm not signing anything until I talk to someone at the school about it. We're in the kitchen and they're eating breakfast they bought for themselves. Dad's face turns red and he starts yelling about disrespect. He says I'm being ungrateful and they have every right to charge me rent. Mom joins in saying I'm acting like a spoiled brat who thinks she's too good to help her own family. I stay calm even though my heart is pounding. I tell them I just want to make sure I understand everything before I sign a legal contract. Dad slams his coffee mug on the counter and coffee splashes everywhere. He starts toward me, but I grab my backpack and leave for school early. I hear him yelling behind me as I walk down the driveway, but I don't look back. My hands are shaking again as I unlock my bike. The ride to the school usually takes 15 minutes, but I do it in 10 because I'm pedaling so hard. I spend my morning classes barely paying attention, trying to figure out who I can trust with this. My math teacher is explaining something about equations, but I'm just staring at my notebook. In English, we're supposed to be doing group work, but I tell my group I don't feel good and sit by myself. The school counselor, Mr. Gilmore, has always been nice when I've seen her in the halls, so during lunch I walk to her office. The main office secretary asks if I have an appointment. I tell her it's kind of an emergency, and she looks at me for a second before picking up the phone. 5 minutes later, Mrs. Gilmore comes out and brings me into her office. She's probably in her 40s with gray hair, and she's wearing a cardigan even though it's warm. Her office has plants on the windowsill and motivational posters on the walls. Mrs. Gilmore listens to everything without interrupting, and when I finish, she looks genuinely concerned. I tell her about being 13 when they stopped buying lunch and supplies, about working since middle school to afford food and clothes, about them ordering takeout while I ate peanut butter, about the locked pantry and the contract Dad wants me to sign. She writes things down in a notebook and nods. When I'm done talking, she asks if I feel safe at home and whether my parents have ever been physically violent, which they haven't. She asks if they've ever hit me or threatened to hurt me. I tell her no, they've never done that. They just stopped taking care of me financially, and now they want me to pay them. Mrs. Gilmore's expression gets more serious and she taps her pen on the desk. She explains that while she's not a lawyer, charging rent to a minor raises serious questions about parental obligations. She says parents are supposed to provide basic necessities until their kids turn 18. If they're charging rent but not providing food or clothes, that could be considered neglect. She opens a drawer and pulls out some pamphlets about free legal aid services. She asks if I'd be comfortable with her making some calls to get me connected with someone who can give real legal advice. I tell her yes, please. I need help figuring this out. Mrs. Gilmore picks up her phone and steps outside for a minute. Through the window in her door, I can see her talking to someone and writing things down. When she comes back, she tells me she left a message with legal aid, and they should call back within a day or two. I agree and feel this huge weight lift just from telling someone the truth. For 3 years, I've been handling everything alone and pretending it was normal. Having an adult actually listen and take me seriously makes me want to cry, but I hold it together. Mrs. Gilmore also helps me apply for free lunch right there in her office, which I should have done years ago but was too embarrassed. She pulls up the form on her computer and helps me fill it out. She says it's nothing to be ashamed of and lots of students use the program. The application asks about household income and family size. Mrs. Gilmore helps me explain that my parents don't provide food money even though they live in the house. She submits it electronically and says I should be approved within a few days. When I leave her office, I feel lighter than I have in months. Someone knows. Someone is helping. I'm not completely alone anymore. 2 days later, I meet with Boyd from Legal Aid, who explains that parents must provide food, shelter, and basic necessities to minor children. Mrs. Gilmore set up the meeting and drove me to the Legal Aid office downtown after school. Boyd is younger than I expected, maybe in his 30s, with glasses and a tie. His office is small with boxes of files stacked everywhere. He has me sit down and pulls out a yellow notepad. He asks me to start from the beginning and tell him everything. I go through the whole story again and he takes notes the entire time. When I get to the part about the rent contract, he stops writing and looks up. Charging rent could be considered neglect if it prevents them from meeting those obligations, he says. He explains that parents have a legal duty to support their minor children. They can't just decide to stop providing necessities and charge rent instead. Boyd asks detailed questions about what my parents do provide versus what I pay for myself. When I list everything, food, clothes, school supplies, toiletries, his expression gets more serious. He writes it all down in 2 columns labeled provided and not provided. The not provided column is way longer. He asks about their income and whether they're actually struggling financially, or just choosing not to spend money on me. I tell him about the sports package and the golf membership and the restaurant meals, about how they had plenty of money until Dad got laid off a few months ago. Boyd nods and keeps writing. He asks if I have any proof of what I'm telling him. I show him the screenshots from my phone of their takeout orders piled up in the trash while my cabinets were empty. Photos of the locked pantry. My budget notebook showing every dollar I've earned and spent for 2 years. Boyd looks through everything carefully and his jaw gets tight. He closes the notebook and leans back in his chair. Boyd tells me this documentation is solid evidence and exactly what we need if things get worse. He explains that he can write a formal letter to my parents outlining their legal duties as parents of a minor child. The letter will cite specific state laws about providing food, shelter, clothing, and basic necessities. It won't force them to change their behavior, but it might make them realize they can't just kick me out or demand all my money. Boyd says the letter will be professional and factual, not threatening, but it will make clear that their actions could be considered neglect. He asks if I want him to send it and I nod immediately. Having something official from a lawyer feels like protection I've never had before. Boyd prints out some information sheets about my rights and tells me to keep documenting everything. He also gives me his direct phone number in case things escalate quickly. The meeting ends with him promising to mail the letter within 2 days. That evening at home, I'm heating up ramen in the microwave when both my parents walk into the kitchen. They have that look on their faces again, the serious one that means they're about to corner me. Dad crosses his arms and asks if I've thought about the rent contract. I take a breath and tell them I talked to a lawyer at Legal Aid. Mom's face goes pale and Dad's jaw tightens. I explain that I learned parents have to provide basic necessities whether their kid pays rent or not. Dad's face turns red and he starts yelling about how I'm threatening them and trying to make them look like bad parents. His voice gets louder with each word and I can feel my heart pounding, but I keep my expression calm. Mom starts crying and saying I'm so ungrateful after they've kept a roof over my head for 15 years. She's doing that thing where she cries to make me feel guilty, but I've seen it too many times to fall for it anymore. Dad steps closer and says I'm tearing this family apart over money. I stay calm and repeat exactly what Boyd told me. I'm willing to help with chores around the house and contribute in reasonable ways, but I won't sign a contract that takes all my earnings. My voice stays steady even though my hands are shaking. I tell them I need my money for food and school supplies since they stopped providing those things years ago. Dad opens his mouth to yell again, but I just turn and walk toward my room. They're both shouting behind me about disrespect and ingratitude, but I keep walking. I hear them storm off to their bedroom and slam the door so hard the whole house shakes. While walking at the mall, a security guard came up to me and said, "Ma'am, is this child yours?" I was about to say no, but the kid looked at me with fear in her eyes. She nodded her head slightly and mouthed the words, "Say yes, please," while the guard wasn't looking. Something in her expression made me trust her instantly. "Yes, this is my daughter." I pulled her into a hug and felt her trembling against me. The security guard looked skeptical. He was a heavy-set man with a mustache who reminded me of Paul Blart. She was hiding in the dressing rooms for over an hour. Staff was concerned. "I'm so sorry. We got separated and she must have gotten scared." I rubbed the girl's back trying to seem maternal. You know how kids are. He studied us both for a long moment. The girl buried her face in my shoulder and I could feel her heart racing against my chest. Finally, he nodded and walked away, but I noticed he spoke into his radio as he left. We didn't have much time. As soon as he turned the corner, I knelt down to the girl's level. She had dirty blonde hair in a messy ponytail, and her Pokemon Eevee t-shirt had stains on it. Dark circles under her eyes made her look older than she probably was. Her eyes kept darting around like she expected someone to jump out at any moment. "Are you safe?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "There's someone who took my mom and I'm scared they'll take me too." My heart started racing, but I tried to stay calm for her. I took her hand and noticed how cold her fingers were. "Let's go somewhere with more people, okay?" I led her to the food court where it was crowded and we'd blend in better. The lunch rush meant every table was full and the noise would cover our conversation. I bought her a slice of pizza and a lemonade, then found us seats near the exit. She devoured the food like she hadn't eaten in days. "Who took your mom? What did they look like?" I kept my voice gentle while my eyes scanned every face that passed. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "The man said he was a cop, but he wasn't a cop." My mom knew something was wrong. "How did she know?" I asked while watching a man in a maintenance uniform push a garbage cart past us. The girl took a sip of the lemonade I'd bought her. Her hands shook slightly as she held the cup. "She used to be a cop." She said his badge looked fake and his uniform was wrong. The shoulder patches were for a different county and his belt only had handcuffs. "What happened then?" I noticed the same security guard from earlier standing by the Panda Express watching us. We were shopping for my birthday when he approached us. My mom grabbed my hand really tight and started walking fast, but he followed. She made me go into the changing room at JCPenney and told me, "That man is not a cop. Do not let them grab you by any means." Then I heard yelling, and when I came out, she was gone. When did this happen? I was already pulling out my phone to call 911. 3 days ago. She looked down at her pizza crust. 3 days? Where have you been staying? I tried to keep the shock out of my voice. My mom's car. She taught me where she hid the spare key under the wheel well, but I ran out of the snacks she kept in there yesterday. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away like she was used to being strong. I was dialing 911 when she suddenly grabbed my arm. Her small fingers dug in with surprising strength. "He's here. The fake cop is here." My thumb froze over the call button. I looked around but saw only normal mall shoppers. Families with strollers eating orange chicken. Teenagers taking selfies by the fountain. A man in a suit checking his phone by the ATM. I don't see anyone in a police uniform. He changed clothes, but I know his face. He limps a little on his left side. And his shoes. My mom taught me to memorize details. black dress shoes with a scuff on the right toe. She was practically hyperventilating now. Okay, we're going to calmly walk to the bathroom. Then we'll figure out what to do. I abandoned the 911 call for the moment and grabbed her hand. We stood up trying to look casual. The girl stayed close to my side, using me as a shield from whoever she'd seen. The food court seemed bigger now, and every face looked suspicious. We walked past the Chinese food place, and I was just really confused. Just as we reached the hallway to the bathrooms, she tugged my hand and was shaking. That's him. The man in the blue jacket by Subway. She whispered without looking. I glanced over and my blood went cold. I saw the man's profile and knew who that was without a doubt. No, it can't be. Are you absolutely sure? My voice came out strangled. The girl peeked around me, then quickly hid again. That's him. He's the one who took my mom. He had a partner too, a woman, but I didn't see her face. In my head I thought, a woman? But that man is my husband. My whole body went cold and I grabbed the girl's hand tighter while pulling her into the bathroom. The heavy door swung shut behind us and I pushed her into the biggest stall at the end, while my hands shook so bad I could barely turn the lock. The girl pressed herself against the wall and watched me with those big scared eyes while I tried to process what I'd just seen. My husband was out there in the food court, and this kid said he kidnapped her mom 3 days ago. I pulled out my phone and typed a text trying to keep my fingers steady. Hey babe, where are you? The 3 dots appeared almost right away. At work dealing with inventory, why? My stomach turned because I'd just seen him standing by the Subway in his blue jacket that he only wore on weekends. The girl tugged on my shirt and whispered that we needed to leave right now because he might have seen us. I cracked the stall door open and peeked out into the empty bathroom, then slowly opened the main door to look down the hallway. The security guard from earlier was walking toward the food court with his radio up to his mouth and I pulled back quickly. We couldn't go back that way and the girl was starting to shake again. I spotted a side exit door near the family bathroom that led to a service corridor and grabbed her hand. We slipped out fast and found ourselves in a white hallway that smelled like cleaning supplies with arrows pointing toward the parking garage. My sneakers squeaked on the waxed floor as we half ran past storage rooms and employee break areas. The girl stayed right beside me and kept looking back over her shoulder every few steps. We pushed through another heavy door and suddenly we were in the parking garage with the smell of exhaust and oil hitting us. I couldn't remember where I'd parked and started clicking my key fob while we walked between the rows of cars. Finally, I heard my Honda beep from 2 rows over and we rushed toward it. The girl climbed into the passenger seat and immediately ducked down below the window, while I started the engine with shaking hands. I sat there for a second, trying to decide if I should call 911 right now or drive somewhere safe first. The girl must have sensed my hesitation because she looked up at me and said, her mom always told her not to trust anyone in uniform unless you're absolutely sure they're real cops. She said it quietly, but firmly, like she was repeating something she'd been taught many times. That made sense considering what happened to her mom, and I realized my husband might have connections at the police department. He'd mentioned cop friends before, though I'd never met them, and now that seemed suspicious. I decided we needed more information before involving anyone official, so I put the car in reverse and started backing out. The girl sat up a little and mentioned that her mom's car was still somewhere in the mall parking lot, with important stuff hidden inside. She knew exactly which section because she'd been living in it for 3 days, and memorized all the landmarks nearby. I drove slowly through the garage and out into the bright sunlight of the surface lot. We circled around to the other side of the mall near the old Sears entrance that had been closed for years. The girl pointed to a faded gray Honda Civic with a cracked windshield parked under a broken light pole. She directed me to the park a few spaces away so we wouldn't be obvious, then showed me exactly where her mom hid the spare key. It was magnetic and stuck up inside the rear wheel, well covered in road grime and rust. The girl knew right where to reach and pulled it out like she'd done it before. Inside the car smelled stale and there were empty granola bar wrappers and juice boxes scattered on the back seat. The girl went straight to the glove compartment and pulled out a manila folder that was wedged behind the owner's manual. Inside was her mom's old police badge from when she worked for the county sheriff's department 5 years ago. There were also some photocopied case files about missing persons and fraud investigations, plus a gas station receipt with a partial license plate number scratched on it in pen. The girl explained that her mom had been investigating something on her own time before this happened. She'd overheard phone calls about people pretending to be cops and taking people who owed money or had warrants. The receipt was from the day before they got grabbed and her mom must have seen something suspicious. I took pictures of everything with my phone, then put the folder back where we found it. We locked the car and put the key back in its hiding spot in case we needed it again. Back in my car, I finally accepted that we needed real police help, despite the risks of my husband having connections. I dialed 911, and when the operator answered, I tried to keep my voice calm while explaining that I had a child whose mother had been kidnapped 3 days ago. The operator asked a bunch of questions about where we were and if we were safe right now. She told us to come straight to the main precinct downtown and said she'd notify the desk sergeant we were coming. The drive took 20 minutes and the girl stayed quiet the whole time, just staring out the window. The police station was an old brick building with narrow windows and metal detectors at the entrance. Inside smelled like coffee and floor wax, and there were people sitting on benches looking tired and frustrated. I told the desk officer why we were there, and he made a call, then directed us to a conference room down the hall. A woman in a suit came in and introduced herself as someone who worked with child victims. She took the girl to another room to talk privately while a detective came to get my statement. I explained everything about finding the girl at the mall and what she'd told me about the fake cop who took her mom. I described seeing a suspicious man but didn't mention yet that it was my husband, because I needed to think about how to handle that. The detective took notes and said they'd pull the mall security footage to identify the suspect, while the girl worked with the specialist to provide more details. About 20 minutes later, a tall black man in a gray suit walked in carrying a thick folder and introduced himself as Detective Jamal Griffith. He had this calm way of moving that made me think he'd seen a lot of bad stuff but still cared about helping people. He sat down across from me and opened the folder, which had forms and photos inside. He asked me to go through everything again from the beginning, and took notes on a yellow legal pad while I talked. When I got to the part about seeing the man at the mall, his pen stopped moving and he looked up at me. He asked specific questions about the man's height and build and the exact location where I saw him. I described the blue jacket and the limp, and how the girl recognized him instantly. He pulled out a tablet and showed me security camera stills from different angles around the mall. The images were grainy, but you could make out people's faces if you looked close enough. He had me point out where we were sitting and which direction the man was facing. While we were going through the photos, a woman in a blazer knocked and came in saying she was from Child Protective Services. She started talking about emergency foster placement for the girl, and paperwork that needed to be filed immediately. I felt my stomach drop thinking about the girl being sent to strangers after everything she'd been through. I told the CPS woman that the girl should have some say in what happens to her since she'd been so smart and brave through all this. The woman looked annoyed and said protocol was protocol, but Detective Griffith backed me up. He said the girl had shown remarkable judgment and deserved to be heard about her preferences. The CPS woman left to talk to the girl and came back 10 minutes later looking less rigid. She said the girl had asked if she could call me later and wanted me to be part of the process. Detective Griffith helped set up approved contact between us and gave me a special number to use. The CPS woman agreed I could be listed as a support person during the placement process. She had me fill out background check forms and emergency contact information. Detective Griffith went back to showing me photos from mall security and asked if anyone looked familiar or suspicious. He had dozens of images from different days and times all organized in a binder. I was looking through them when the girl came back into the room with the specialist. She stood next to me and started looking at the photos too. Then she pointed at one image and my whole body went cold. It was a profile shot of my husband walking past the Orange Julius stand 3 days ago. The timestamp said 2:47 p.m., which was right when the girl said her mom got taken. My hands started shaking and I couldn't breathe properly. Detective Griffith noticed my reaction and asked if I recognized someone. Before I could answer, my phone started ringing and my husband's name appeared on the screen. His timing was always creepy like that, calling right when I was thinking about him. I answered trying to sound normal while everyone in the room watched me. He asked where I was in that controlling voice he used when he was suspicious. I told him I was still shopping at Nordstrom looking for a birthday gift for my sister. He said I'd been gone a long time and asked which Nordstrom I was at. I said the one downtown and he asked what I'd bought so far. I made up something about looking at purses but not finding the right one yet. He kept pushing for details like what color and what brand and how much they cost. His voice got harder when I stayed vague and he said he'd driven by the mall earlier and didn't see my car. I said I'd parked on the other side by Macy's because it was less crowded. He went quiet for a few seconds then said, I better not be lying to him. After I hung up, my hands were shaking so bad I dropped the phone. Detective Griffith picked it up and looked at me with this understanding expression. I took a deep breath and told him the man in the photo might be my husband. He didn't act shocked or judge me, but immediately started asking practical questions. He wanted to know my husband's full name and date of birth and where he worked. He asked about our vehicles and if my husband had any law enforcement connections or training. I told him my husband used to work security at different places, but never stayed at one job long. Detective Griffith called someone and asked them to pull mall security footage from today and 3 days ago. He wanted every angle that showed the food court and the surrounding stores. Within an hour, they had a laptop set up showing different camera feeds. We watched my husband walking through the mall 3 days ago, with that slight limp on his left side. His black dress shoes were visible in one shot, and you could see the scuff on the right toe. The footage from today showed him in the blue jacket moving through the food court, right when we were there. Detective Griffith pointed out how my husband kept checking exits and watching people like he was hunting. An officer came in and whispered something to the detective who nodded and looked serious. He told me they'd put an unmarked car outside the station 20 minutes ago for routine surveillance. The car had just radioed in that my husband's truck was driving by slowly like he was looking for something. When the driver noticed the surveillance unit, he sped up and left the area. Detective Griffith said this confirmed my husband was watching for me and probably knew I'd come here. He made some calls and within an hour had arranged a safe place for me to stay. It was the extended stay hotel the department used for witnesses that needed protection. He had tech specialists come mirror my phone so every call and text from my husband would be tracked and recorded. They gave me a different phone to use for personal calls and told me to keep my regular phone turned on and charged. They wanted my husband to think everything was normal while they built their case. That night, I was sitting in the hotel room when the new phone rang. It was the girl calling from her emergency foster placement. She sounded scared but said the family seemed nice and gave her own room with a lock on the door. She said she kept remembering more details about where they took her mom. There was this specific smell she noticed. Rubber mixed with bleach like a hospital but different. She thought it might be some kind of storage place or warehouse because she heard metal doors slamming. I wrote down everything she said about the smell and the metal doors, and Detective Griffith immediately made calls to get a search warrant for my house. 2 hours later, while my husband was still at work, 6 officers showed up at my door with the paperwork. They went through every room, pulling stuff out of closets and checking behind furniture. One officer found a prepaid phone taped under our bedroom dresser that I never knew existed. The call history showed dozens of calls to storage facilities on the outskirts of town over the past month. My regular phone buzzed with a text from my husband asking where I was and saying I needed to come home right away. He said I was overreacting about something and making a big deal out of nothing. His next message said he knew I'd been to the police station because a coworker saw my car there. He kept texting that we needed to talk and I was being crazy and paranoid like always. The officers took photos of everything including the texts while I sat on my couch watching strangers go through my life. Detective Griffith arrived and asked me about our finances while the search continued. I told him about the money problems we'd been having since my husband lost his previous job 6 months ago. I mentioned finding a shoebox full of cash in our garage last week that he said was from selling tools. The detective wrote everything down and said desperate people do desperate things for money. He asked if my husband had any connections to law enforcement or security work. I remembered he'd worked as a temp at different security companies over the years, but never stayed anywhere long. The foster family called that afternoon to say the girl was doing okay, but having bad dreams about her mom. They said she woke up screaming twice and kept asking if I was safe. Detective Griffith helped arrange for me to visit her the next day and bring some things from her mom's car. I drove back to the mall parking lot and found the Honda still there with a police seal on it. An officer met me there and let me take a stuffed bear and a blanket from the back seat. The next morning, I went to the foster home, which was a small house with a swing set in the yard. The girl ran to me when I walked in and hugged me tight for a long time. I gave her the bear and blanket and she held them against her face, breathing in the smell. We sat on the couch and she started talking about the day her mom was taken. She remembered driving past a water tower with a smiley face painted on it right before they stopped. She said the fake cop's car was already there waiting when they pulled into what looked like an old warehouse area. This detail helped the police narrow down which storage facilities to check since there was only one water tower like that in town. Detective Griffith called me that night to say they'd searched 3 storage sites near that water tower. At one location they found zip ties and rope along with a receipt that had fallen behind some boxes. The receipt had a woman's name on it that I didn't recognize at all. The name was Sophia something, and the receipt was for cleaning supplies from 2 weeks ago. Traffic camera footage showed my husband's truck at those same storage units 2 nights before the kidnapping happened. The timeline was getting clearer and the evidence was piling up against him. I went back to the mother's car the next day with permission to look for anything else helpful. Under the driver's seat, I found a notebook with dates and locations written in neat handwriting. The notes described other fake cop incidents in 3 nearby counties over the past year. Each incident involved someone approaching women with children claiming to be police, but having wrong uniforms or badges. Detective Griffith ran the information and found reports matching the descriptions, but no arrests had been made. He discovered my husband had worked as a temp for the company that handles mall security contracts. The work records showed he'd been assigned to our mall twice, which explained how he knew the blind spots. He would have learned where all the cameras were and which areas security rarely checked. The girl did another recorded interview at the police station with a child specialist present. She remembered more about the woman who was with the fake cop that day. The woman had a crescent moon tattoo on her wrist that she noticed when the woman grabbed her arm. She also remembered the woman wrote something down with her left hand which stuck out to her. These details were added to the case file along with everything else they'd gathered so far. My husband kept calling and texting, but I didn't answer following the detective's instructions to let everything go to voicemail. His messages got more angry and then switched to apologizing and saying he loved me. The police said this pattern was typical for someone who knew they were caught. I stayed at the hotel another night, barely sleeping and wondering how I'd missed all the signs. The next morning, Detective Griffith called to say they had enough evidence to arrest my husband. They were planning to pick him up at his workplace that afternoon to avoid any problems. I felt sick thinking about how our neighbors would react when they found out what he'd done. The detective said I should prepare myself because this would probably make the news. I went back to the hotel room and started looking through my husband's stuff on our shared cloud account. His photos synced automatically, and I scrolled through hundreds of boring work pictures, until I found something weird. There were photos from a bar dated 3 weeks ago with a woman I'd never seen before. She had dark hair pulled back and was laughing at something my husband was saying. In one photo she was holding a drink and I could see her left wrist clearly. The crescent moon tattoo was right there, exactly like the girl had described. My hands shook as I screenshot everything and sent them to Detective Griffith's email. He called me back within minutes and said they'd identified her as Sophia Greer from DMV records. The police got a warrant for her apartment that same night, but when they arrived she was already gone. The landlord let them in and the place was mostly empty except for some furniture and trash. The neighbors told officers they'd seen her loading boxes into a white van at 3 in the morning 2 days ago. One neighbor remembered the van had a dent in the back bumper and a parking sticker from the community college. Detective Griffith called me the next morning to warn me that my husband might try to come home. They had officers watching our house just in case he showed up. Sure enough, around noon he pulled into our driveway in his truck. The moment he saw the unmarked police cars, he threw the truck in reverse and took off down the street. Officers chased him on foot when he abandoned the truck and ran through the Johnsons' backyard. He jumped their fence and disappeared into the woods behind our neighborhood. The police searched for hours with dogs, but he knew those woods from years of jogging there. They found his footprints leading to the creek, but lost the trail after that. Detective Griffith said I couldn't go back to the hotel anymore since my husband might know about it. They moved me to a different safe house across town that afternoon. I packed my few things into garbage bags and left everything else behind. The new place was a small apartment above a dry cleaner with bars on the windows. The isolation hit me hard that first night when I realized I couldn't call anyone or go anywhere. I understood it was for safety, but the loneliness was crushing. 2 days later, the Financial Crimes Unit called with their findings about my husband's bank records. They'd found deposits from 3 different companies that turned out to be fronts for illegal skip tracing operations. These weren't real bounty hunters, but criminals who grabbed people for money without any legal authority. The payments went back 18 months and totaled over $40,000. My husband had been doing this for over a year, while I thought he was working overtime at his regular job. The girl called me that night from her foster placement, and she was crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Her foster mom got on the phone and said she'd been having nightmares and woke up screaming. I talked to the girl and helped her count to 10 slowly while taking deep breaths. We did the breathing exercises her mom had taught her until her crying slowed down. She kept saying she missed her mom and wanted to go home. I stayed on the phone for an hour until she finally fell asleep. Her foster mom thanked me and said the girl had been asking about me every day. 3 days after that, Detective Griffith called with news about Sophia's car. They'd found it abandoned in a parking garage downtown with the plates removed. The crime scene team found blood on the passenger seat that matched the mother's DNA from her medical records. The amount of blood suggested she'd been hurt, but probably not killed. There were also zip ties in the trunk and a roll of duct tape under the seat. The parking garage had cameras, but someone had spray painted over the lenses. Detective Griffith came to the safe house that afternoon to go over everything we knew so far. I finally told him the truth about them all. I'd recognized my husband right away when the girl pointed him out, but my brain wouldn't accept it. I kept thinking there had to be some mistake or explanation. The detective said denial was completely normal when someone you love turns out to be dangerous. He'd seen it hundreds of times in domestic cases. He asked if I'd be willing to help them catch my husband since he might contact me. The plan would be to set up a meeting somewhere public with tons of backup nearby. I was scared but agreed because I wanted this to end. They would put a wire on me and have officers all around wherever we met. My husband was getting desperate based on his text messages and might make a mistake. The detective promised they wouldn't let anything happen to me. The next day, a victim advocate came to explain my rights and make sure I understood what I was agreeing to. She was an older woman with kind eyes who'd worked with crime victims for 20 years. She asked if I felt pressured to do the operation, and I told her I wanted to help. We went over safety plans and signals I could use if I felt unsafe. She gave me her cell number and said I could change my mind at any time. Nobody would blame me if I decided not to go through with it. That night, my phone buzzed with a voice message from the girl, and when I played it, her small voice filled my empty apartment saying she was proud of me for helping catch the bad man. She said her foster mom helped her record it and she wanted me to know I was brave like her mom taught her to be. Her words made my chest tight and I played the message 3 more times while sitting on my kitchen floor crying, because this kid who'd been through so much was trying to make me feel better. The next morning, Detective Griffith called to say they were ready to set up a meeting with my husband, and asked if I was still willing to go through with it. My hands shook as I said yes, and he explained they'd have officers in unmarked cars all around the park, plus some dressed as joggers and people walking dogs. He said I should text my husband that I wanted to talk about our marriage, and see if he'd meet me at Riverside Park near the playground where we used to go on dates when we first met. I sent the text with my fingers trembling so bad I had to retype it twice, and within 5 minutes he replied saying he'd be there at 2 o'clock, and we could work everything out. The detective came to the safe house to put a tiny microphone under my shirt collar, and showed me the hand signal to use if I felt unsafe, which was touching my left ear twice. 2 officers drove me to the park in an unmarked sedan, and dropped me off a block away so I could walk to the meeting spot looking natural. The playground was busy with kids on swings and parents on benches, which made me feel safer knowing there were witnesses everywhere, plus all the undercover cops scattered around. I sat on the bench where we'd carved our initials 5 years ago and tried to breathe normally while watching a woman push her toddler on the swing set. My husband showed up 10 minutes late walking with a worse limp than before, and his clothes looked wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in his car. He sat down leaving space between us, and immediately started talking about how Sophia had forced him into everything by threatening to hurt me if he didn't help her grab people for money. His story kept changing as he talked first, saying he just drove the car, then admitting he helped restrain people, but claiming he never hurt anyone badly. I asked about the girl's mother, and he looked around nervously before leaning closer, and whispering that she was still alive, but only he knew where. He said he'd been keeping her fed and giving her water, but she needed medical help soon, and he'd only tell the location if they promised him a reduced sentence. The detective's voice came through my earpiece telling me to keep him talking, so I asked why he did it, and he grabbed my wrist saying we needed the money for IVF treatments and a bigger house. His grip hurt, and I saw 2 joggers change direction toward us, but then he let go and stood up saying he knew I was wearing a wire because I kept touching my collar. He started to run, but his bad leg made him slow, and within seconds 3 officers tackled him to the ground right in front of the playground where parents grabbed their kids and hurried away. They cuffed him while he yelled that the mother would die if they didn't make a deal with him, but Detective Griffith just read him his rights and had him loaded into a patrol car. Back at the police station, my husband's lawyer showed up within an hour demanding to speak with his client privately before any questioning. The detective paced the hallway outside the interview room, checking his watch every few minutes because every second counted for finding the mother alive. After 3 hours of negotiations, the lawyer came out saying his client would reveal the location in exchange for dropping the kidnapping charge down to unlawful imprisonment. The prosecutor argued for 2 more hours while I sat in the victim services room drinking cold coffee and thinking about the mother suffering somewhere. Finally, they reached a deal where my husband would get 12 years instead of 25, if the mother was found alive, and he testified against Sophia and the others in the ring. He gave them an address for a storage unit off Highway 87 near the Industrial District, and within minutes every available unit raced there with sirens blaring. The storage facility manager met them with bolt cutters, and they found the mother in Unit 447 tied to a metal chair with duct tape over her mouth and zip ties on her wrists and ankles. She was conscious but weak from dehydration, and the paramedics started an IV right there in the storage unit while checking her vitals. They rushed her to the hospital with Detective Griffith following the ambulance to get her statement as soon as the doctors cleared her. The girl was brought to the hospital with her foster mom and a counselor to reunite with her mother, who was hooked up to monitors but awake and crying. They held each other for 20 minutes without saying anything, while the medical staff checked them both for signs of trauma that might need immediate intervention. The mother kept touching her daughter's face like she couldn't believe she was real, and the girl wouldn't let go of her mom's hand even when the nurse needed to adjust the IV. Meanwhile, the detective got word that Sophia's credit card had been used at a gas station 2 states over and traffic cameras caught her car heading toward the border. The investigation revealed she was part of a larger network of fake cops who'd been grabbing people for illegal bounty hunting operations across 5 states over the past 3 years. That night, the local news ran the story with my husband's mugshot, and suddenly my phone started buzzing nonstop with calls and texts from reporters wanting interviews. By morning, someone had posted my photo and address online saying I must have known what my husband was doing and deserved to be in jail too. The harassment got so bad with people calling me a kidnapper's wife and sending death threats that I had to delete all my social media accounts and change my phone number completely. The next morning, I went straight to the courthouse with all the bank statements I'd been gathering and filed for divorce citing immediate danger and criminal activity. The clerk gave me forms for a restraining order too, and I filled them out right there in the lobby with my hands still shaking from everything. Within 2 hours, a judge signed the emergency order preventing my husband from coming within 500 feet of me or contacting me in any way. The court also froze our joint bank accounts pending investigation into the illegal money, which meant I couldn't access our savings, but at least he couldn't either. 3 days later, my husband's lawyer called the prosecutor's office saying his client wanted to make a deal and would give up everyone involved in exchange for reduced charges. The prosecutor told me they met for 6 hours going back and forth on terms while my husband sat there in his orange jumpsuit looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He agreed to testify against Sophia and 12 other people in the fake cop ring if they'd reduce his sentence from 25 years down to 15, with possibility of parole in 10. The deal made me sick, but Detective Griffith explained it was the only way to take down the whole operation and save other victims. Meanwhile, the mother was dealing with her own problems as the police department opened an internal investigation into her old cases, since she'd been a cop before. She had to sit through hours of questioning about whether she'd ever seen signs of this criminal ring during her time on the force. The investigators went through every arrest she'd made and every report she'd filed looking for connections, but she cooperated completely and answered everything. All she wanted was to focus on getting better and being there for her daughter who needed her more than ever after everything they'd been through. Social services finally approved the girl to go back home with her mom, but only under strict supervision with weekly check-ins and mandatory therapy sessions. They moved into a smaller apartment near the hospital where the mother could continue her physical therapy for the injuries from being tied up so long. The girl helped her mom with exercises every morning before school, and they started going to family counseling twice a week to work through the trauma together. The counselor taught them breathing exercises and grounding techniques for when the memories got too strong, which happened a lot at first. 5 weeks after everything started, the police got a tip that Sophia was at a Greyhound station trying to buy a ticket to Mexico under a fake name. Security cameras showed her wearing a wig and sunglasses, but the crescent tattoo on her wrist gave her away when she handed over cash for the ticket. Police surrounded the bus just as she was boarding and found 3 fake IDs in her purse along with $8,000 in cash wrapped in rubber bands. She fought them and tried to run, but they tackled her right there on the platform, while other passengers recorded everything on their phones. The preliminary hearing started 2 months later, and I had to testify about everything I saw and knew, which meant facing my husband in court for the first time since his arrest. I wore my most professional outfit and kept my voice steady even when his lawyer tried to make me look like I was lying about not knowing anything. My husband sat at the defense table in a suit that didn't fit right anymore since he'd lost weight in jail and kept trying to catch my eye. I told the court about finding the money in our garage and seeing him at the mall with the girl, and how he'd lied about being at work that day. The prosecutor showed security footage and phone records that backed up everything I said while my husband just stared at his hands on the table. After my testimony, I was walking to the parking garage when my husband's mother grabbed my arm and begged me to visit him in jail. I pulled away and kept walking, but then my husband himself called out from where guards were leading him back to holding after the hearing. He said he was sorry, and that he never meant for any of this to happen, but his apology was all about how hard this was for him. He talked about his debts and his fear, and how Sophia had manipulated him, but never once mentioned the mother tied up in that storage unit, or the little girl hiding alone in a car for 3 days. I turned my back on him and walked away while he kept yelling that he loved me until the guards dragged him through the doors. Sophia's preliminary hearing was the next week, and her lawyer was much more aggressive than my husband's had been about attacking the evidence. He argued that the storage unit receipt could have been planted, and that the witness identifications were unreliable since the girl was traumatized and I was biased. The judge threw out 2 of the lesser charges for lack of direct evidence, but kept the kidnapping and conspiracy charges that could still get her 20 years. Sophia sat there the whole time with no expression on her face, like none of this mattered to her at all, which made me even angrier. After all the court stuff, I finally started seeing a therapist because I couldn't sleep and kept having panic attacks whenever I saw men who looked like my husband. The therapist's office had soft lighting and a white noise machine, but I still felt exposed talking about how stupid I felt for not knowing who I'd married. Some nights I'd wake up at 3 in the morning convinced I heard him trying to get in, even though I knew he was locked up. The therapist taught me to journal when I couldn't sleep, and slowly the nightmares started happening less often, though they never went away completely. The girl went back to the school a month after reuniting with her mom, but it was really hard for her to adjust to normal kid stuff again. Loud noises made her panic, and she couldn't handle being in crowded hallways between classes, so they gave her permission to leave 5 minutes early. Her teacher told me she was using the coping skills from therapy like counting to 10, and focusing on her breathing when things got overwhelming. She even started making friends with a quiet girl who sat with her at lunch, and didn't ask questions about why she sometimes had to leave suddenly. Detective Griffith called me one afternoon while I was hacking boxes in my bedroom, and told me the girl's mother needed work. He knew someone at a security company downtown who was hiring for desk work, and wondered if I could drive her to the interview since she still didn't have a car. I picked her up the next morning, and she wore the only nice outfit she had left. A black blazer that hung loose on her frame after everything she'd been through. The security company was in a plain office building near the courthouse, and the manager seemed nice enough when he shook her hand. She got the job that same day, starting part-time at minimum wage, but it was something. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers finally came through, and I signed them at my kitchen table without crying. The apartment I found across town was half the size of our old house, but the rent was cheap and the neighbors kept to themselves. I packed our wedding photos into a cardboard box and shoved it in the back of the closet where I wouldn't have to look at them. The china we got as wedding gifts went to Goodwill along with the matching towels and the stupid throw pillows he picked out. Moving day came, and I loaded everything into a rental truck by myself because I didn't want anyone's pity or help. The new place smelled like fresh paint and had water stains on the ceiling, but it was mine alone. 3 months after everything happened, an envelope showed up at my new address with the girl's handwriting on it. Inside was an invitation to her birthday party, the one they'd been shopping for when everything went wrong. The party was at a park near their new apartment, and only 5 kids showed up, but everyone seemed genuinely happy. The girl wore a new Pokemon shirt, and her mom had made a homemade cake that leaned to one side. They sang happy birthday, and the girl blew out her candles in one breath like she'd been practicing. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered thank you, and I had to blink hard to keep from crying in front of everyone. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one from the state prison where my husband was being held. His handwriting looked shaky, and the letter went on for 3 pages about his gambling debts and how scared he'd been of the people he owed money to. He wrote about how Sophia had promised him quick cash and how he'd convinced himself nobody would really get hurt. I read it once standing by my mailbox, then walked straight to the dumpster and threw it away without responding. The trial dates kept getting pushed back, but finally 6 months after that day at the mall, the sentences came down. Sophia got 8 years with possibility of parole in 5, and my husband got his plea deal time of 15 years. The girl and her mom had moved into their own apartment by then with help from victim services and some nonprofit that helped crime survivors. The mom was working full-time hours at the security company and had even gotten a small raise after her boss saw how reliable she was. I was working 2 jobs myself, cashier at Target during the day and stocking shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. My back hurt constantly, and I fell asleep standing up sometimes, but the bills were getting paid without his income. The girl texted me pictures sometimes of her school projects or her cat they'd gotten from the shelter. She was doing better in the school, and her grades were mostly B's now that she could focus without being scared all the time. Detective Griffith stopped by the Target where I worked one day to check how I was doing, and mentioned they'd arrested 2 more people from the fake cop ring. Most of them were in custody now, though he admitted a couple were probably in Mexico or somewhere they couldn't reach. He gave me his card again and said to call if I ever felt unsafe, but nothing weird had happened since the trials ended. 8 months after everything, I met someone at my second job who made me laugh for the first time in forever. He knew my whole story because everyone at work had gossiped about it, but he didn't treat me like I was broken or dangerous. We went for coffee after our shift one night and he listened without judging when I told him the parts the gossip had gotten wrong. He had his own messy divorce story and understood why I flinched when someone came up behind me too fast. We took things slow and he never pushed when I said I needed space to process everything. The girl's mom called me one day to say she'd been promoted to full-time supervisor at the security company with benefits and everything. Her voice sounded stronger than it had in months, and she invited me over to see their apartment now that they'd had time to really settle in. The girl had her own room with Pokemon posters and a desk where she did her homework every night without being asked. She showed me the certificate she'd won for a school writing contest where she wrote about what real bravery means. The essay was about her mom teaching her to memorize details and stay smart when you're scared, and how sometimes being brave means asking a stranger for help in a mall bathroom. We all had scars that would probably never completely go away, but we were building something new from what was left. Thanks for letting me wonder right alongside you. Definitely been something sharing these moments. Until next time. Like the video, it helps more than you think. What's the dumbest reason a classmate ruined their entire life? There was a kid in our school named Odell Pratt. I need you to understand something about Odell before I tell you what he did. Odell was not a troubled kid. He was not going through something. He did not have a difficult home life. He had 2 parents who showed up to every school event. He lived in a nice house on a cul-de-sac with a trampoline in the backyard. He had a car his parents bought him for his 17th birthday. He had everything a person could need to turn out fine, and he still managed to become the dumbest human being any of us had ever met. Odell's problem was that he didn't like being told what to do. Not in a rebellious, cool way. In a bratty, foot-stomping, I shouldn't have to way. If a teacher told him to put his phone away, he'd put it in his pocket and pull it out 30 seconds later like the instruction had an expiration date. If he got a detention, he'd argue with the teacher in front of the whole class about how it was unfair. He once told our history teacher, Mr. Kimball, that homework was a violation of his personal time. Mr. Kimball just stared at him and said, "Sit down, Odell." Odell sat down, but he mumbled about it for the rest of the period. He was that kid, the one who thought rules were suggestions that applied to everyone except him, the one who thought being difficult was the same thing as being smart. He wasn't smart. He had a 1.9 GPA, and the only reason it wasn't lower was because his parents hired a tutor twice a week, and his mom emailed teachers constantly asking for extra credit opportunities. His mom, by the way, was part of the problem. Her name was Faye, and she treated Odell like he was a misunderstood genius instead of a kid who refused to do his work. Every time Odell got in trouble, Faye would come to the school and sit in the front office and explain to whoever would listen that Odell was just bored because the curriculum didn't challenge him. He wasn't bored, he was lazy. There's a difference. Now here's where the story goes from annoying to insane. Junior year, 2nd semester, we had a major AP biology exam coming up. This test counted for 30% of our semester grade. Our teacher, Mrs. Abeda, had been preparing us for it for 3 weeks. She gave us review packets, study guides, held extra sessions after school. She did everything a teacher could do. Odell did nothing. He didn't study. He didn't do the review packet. He didn't come to a single after-school session. He told his friend Greer, who sat next to me in English, that the test was pointless and that he wasn't going to waste his weekend studying for something that didn't matter. The test was on a Thursday. On Wednesday night, Odell apparently realized he was going to fail. Not might fail, was going to fail. Because he hadn't opened a textbook in 3 weeks and the test was in 12 hours. So instead of studying, instead of asking for help, instead of accepting the consequences of his own choices like a normal person, Odell did the single most selfish and stupid thing anyone at our school had ever done. He called in a threat. He used a burner burner phone app and called the school's main office line at 6 in the morning on Thursday. He disguised his voice and said there was an explosive device in the building and that if anyone entered the school, people would get hurt. The secretary who answered the phone was a woman named Mrs. Linden, who had worked at our school for 22 years. She was 60 years old. She told the police later that her hands were shaking so bad she could barely dial 911. She said she thought about her grandchildren who attended the elementary school next door. She said she went home that night and couldn't sleep because of a test, because a 17-year-old boy didn't want to take a biology test. The police showed up within minutes. They evacuated the entire building. 1,200 students were pulled out of class and herded onto the football field in 30-degree weather. Some kids were crying. A freshman girl had a panic attack so bad that an ambulance had to come for her. 2 teachers who had been in the building early for tutoring sessions had to be escorted out by officers in tactical gear. Parents started showing up after the news spread. Some of them were running from their cars. I watched a mother sprint across the parking lot in her work clothes screaming her son's name. I'll never forget that. We stood on that field for almost 4 hours while police swept every room, every locker, every closet in the building. They brought in dogs. They brought in a unit from the county. They found nothing because there was nothing to find, because there was never any danger. There was just Odell Pratt, sitting in his car in a parking lot 2 blocks away, waiting for the whole thing to blow over so the test would get postponed. They caught him in less than 48 hours. The burner phone app he used wasn't as anonymous as he thought. The police traced the IP address back to his home Wi-Fi network. That alone would have been enough, but Odell made it even easier for them. He had downloaded the app on his actual phone, the one registered to his parents' account, the one with his real name and real number attached to it. The detective who worked the case told the school board during a public safety briefing that it was the fastest trace he'd ever done. He said most people who do something like this at least try to cover their tracks. Odell didn't even clear his search history. He had Googled how to disguise your voice on a phone call at 11:47 the night before, on the same phone, linked to the same account. They also pulled surveillance footage from the gas station across the street from the parking lot where he sat during the evacuation. You could see his car pull in at 6:14 in the morning, 4 minutes after the call was made, and you could see him just sitting there with his phone in his hand, watching the school in his rearview mirror. He sat there for the entire 4 hours. He didn't leave. He didn't drive around. He just watched. Like it was a show he'd put on, and he wanted to see how it played out. He didn't even try to hide. He didn't think he'd need to, because Odell Pratt genuinely believed he was going to get away with it. He thought the call would cancel school for the day, the test would be rescheduled, and he'd have more time to figure things out. That's how his brain worked. Every problem had a shortcut, and every shortcut had no consequences. He had been taught that his whole life, and he believed it right up until the moment 2 detectives knocked on his door. The police showed up at his house on a Saturday morning. His dad opened the door in a bathrobe. Greer told me later that he heard this from Odell's neighbor who was outside walking their dog when the cruisers pulled up. 2 detectives and a uniformed officer walked inside and came out 20 minutes later with Odell in handcuffs. His dad was standing on the porch with his hands on top of his head, like he couldn't physically process what was happening. His mom, Faye, was behind him in the doorway, and the neighbor said she was screaming. Not crying. Screaming. Like someone was hurting her. They charged Odell as a juvenile, but the charges were not juvenile level. Making a terroristic threat, inducing panic, filing a false report, disruption of public services, obstruction. The district attorney added a charge related to the cost of the emergency response, which came to over $90,000. Police, tactical units, the dogs, the county team, the ambulance for the freshman girl, all of it billed back to the incident. $90,000 because Odell didn't study for a biology test. When the news broke at school, nobody was surprised. That's the part that hit me hardest. Not one single person in our school said I can't believe Odell would do that. The reaction was universal. Of course it was Odell. Of course it was. Teachers weren't surprised. Students weren't surprised. Even the janitor, Mr. Polk, who had been cleaning that school for longer than most of us had been alive, shook his head and said to another staff member in the hallway that he knew something like this was coming. He said he'd watched that boy walk through the halls for 3 years like the building existed for his convenience, and everyone in it was background noise. Greer took it the hardest of anyone in our grade. He had been Odell's closest friend since middle school. They played video games together on weekends, drove to school together some mornings, sat together at lunch. After the arrest, Greer stopped talking about Odell entirely. If anyone brought it up, he'd go quiet or change the subject or just get up and leave. I asked him once, about a month later, if he'd heard from Odell at all. He looked at me and said Odell texted him the night before the call and asked him what chapters the test covered. Greer told him chapters 8 through 12. Odell replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "Guess I'm cooked." That was the last text between them. Greer said he stared at that text thread for hours after the arrest, wondering if he should have known. I told him there was no way he could have. He said he knew that logically, but it didn't stop the feeling. Everyone had watched Odell refuse to follow rules for years. Everyone had watched him dodge consequences. Everyone had watched his mother storm into the front office to rescue him from the results of his own behavior. This was always where it was heading. We just didn't know the specific cliff he'd drive off until he drove off it. Here's what happened next, and this is the part that turns my stomach. Faye hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. She hired a defense attorney from the city who charged $400 an hour. And the defense they put together was not that Odell didn't do it. It was that Odell shouldn't be punished because he was under academic stress, and the school system had failed to provide adequate support for his learning differences. They actually argued that calling in a threat to a school was a cry for help. They painted him as a victim of an educational system that didn't understand him. I remember my dad reading the court filing at the kitchen table and putting the paper down and just staring at the wall for about 30 seconds. Then he said some people shouldn't be allowed to be parents. The community didn't buy it, not for a second. The parent who I watched sprint across the parking lot screaming for her son, her name was Denise Calder. She spoke at a school board meeting the week after the arrest. She stood at the podium shaking and said she had never been so scared in her entire life. She said she was at work when she got the alert on her phone and she drove 90 miles an hour to get to the school. She said for 12 minutes she didn't know if her son was alive. She said those 12 minutes aged her 10 years, and she wanted to look at the camera and ask the parents of the boy who did this if a biology test was worth that. She said she now drove her son to school every morning and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before leaving because he was afraid to go inside and she was afraid to let him. The freshman girl who had the panic attack was named Waverly. She was 14. After the incident, she refused to go back to the building. Her parents tried everything: counseling, gradual re-entry, meeting with the principal. Waverly would get to the front doors and freeze. She physically could not walk inside. She finished the rest of her freshman year doing online classes from her bedroom. Her mother told the local news that Waverly had been doing well at school before that day. Good grades, involved in choir, starting to make friends. After the evacuation, she stopped sleeping through the night and started having anxiety attacks in grocery stores and movie theaters and any enclosed space with a lot of people because a boy didn't want to take a test. Mrs. Linden, the secretary who took the call, retired 4 months early. She told the school board she couldn't sit at that desk anymore. She said every time the phone rang, she felt her chest tighten and her hands go numb. She said she had worked at that school since she was 38 years old, and she loved every minute of it until the morning of that phone call. She said she didn't blame the school. She blamed the parents who raised a child to believe the world was supposed to bend around him. The judge didn't buy Faye's defense either. Odell was tried in juvenile court, but the judge made it clear that the only reason he wasn't being tried as an adult was because there was no actual device. He said the emotional and psychological harm caused by the threat was real, regardless of whether the threat itself was real. He said he had reviewed the victim impact statements and that the testimony from Mrs. Linden alone was enough to justify the maximum sentence within the juvenile system. He looked at Odell when he said this. He said, "Young man, you had every resource available to you. You had parents, a tutor, teachers who offered extra help, and a school that bent over backward to accommodate you. You responded to all of that by terrorizing 1,200 people because you were too lazy to open a textbook." He sentenced Odell to 18 months in a juvenile detention facility, 400 hours of community service, mandatory psychological evaluation and counseling, and restitution for the full cost of the emergency response, $92,000. Faye collapsed in the courtroom, literally fell out of her chair onto the floor. 2 people had to help her up and walk her to the hallway. She was hyperventilating so badly that a bailiff called for medical assistance. Odell's dad just sat there with his hands in his lap, staring straight ahead. He didn't move to help Faye. He didn't react to the sentence. He just sat there like a man who had finally run out of excuses and had nothing left but the silence. I heard from Greer, who heard it from someone who was there, that Odell didn't react at all. He just looked at the judge like the man was speaking a language he didn't understand. Like the concept of real consequences was something that had never been properly translated for him. And maybe it hadn't. Maybe that was the whole problem. 17 years of his mother explaining away every failure, arguing with every teacher, blaming every system, and never once looking at her son and saying, "This is your fault, fix it." That's not love. That's sabotage in a nice voice. The school expelled him the same week. That was automatic under district policy for any threat-related offense. His transcript was flagged. Every school in the district and every school in the surrounding 3 districts was notified. His academic record now had a permanent note attached to it that read, "Expelled for making a terroristic threat against the school." Try getting into college with that on your file. Try getting a job. Try explaining that to anyone, ever, for the rest of your life. What did you do in high school? Well, I called in a threat because I didn't study for a test. Watch the conversation end right there. Watch the door close. Watch the person across the desk rearrange their face into something polite while they figure out how to get you out of the room. That's Odell's life now. Every application, every interview, every background check for the rest of his existence will circle back to a Thursday morning in junior year when he chose 90 minutes of avoidance over everything that was supposed to come after. The car his parents bought him for his 17th birthday was sold to help pay the restitution. The trampoline house on the cul-de-sac went up for sale 6 months later. Greer told me the family moved, but nobody knew exactly where. Some people said they went to another state to start over. Some people said Faye's parents took them in somewhere down south. It didn't matter. The story followed them because stories like that always do. The thing that stays with me is not what Odell did. Stupid people do stupid things every day. What stays with me is the trail of damage behind him. Mrs. Linden lost a job she loved. Waverly lost a year of normal high school life. Denise Calder sits in a parking lot every morning watching her son walk into a building she's no longer sure is safe. 2 teachers told the local paper they considered leaving the profession after the incident. One of them actually did. She teaches at a private school now with smaller classes and security at every entrance. She said she couldn't stand in front of a classroom of 30 kids and promise them they were safe when she didn't believe it herself anymore. The biology test, by the way, was given the following Monday. Mrs. Abeda didn't postpone it. She didn't curve it. She gave the exact same test on the exact same terms, and every student who had actually studied took it, and life went on. The test average was an 84. The highest score was a 97 from a girl named Priya, who had come to every single study session. Priya is pre-med now. Odell is a convicted felon with $92,000 in restitution debt. That's the distance between studying and not studying, between accepting consequences and running from them, between understanding that the world does not rearrange itself around your comfort and believing that it should. I think about Odell sometimes, not with sympathy, not with hatred either, just with this heavy exhaustion that comes from watching someone have every advantage and every opportunity and every safety net a person could ask for, and still choosing the one path that destroys everything. He had parents, he had a home, he had a tutor and a car and a mother who would have moved mountains for him. All he had to do was study for a test or accept a bad grade and move on with his life, and none of this would have happened. Mrs. Linden would still be answering phones. Waverly would still be singing in choir. Denise Calder wouldn't be sitting in a parking lot every morning trying not to cry. But Odell decided that the rules didn't apply to him, and by the time he learned that they did, he had already burned down everything around him and most of what was ahead of him. The last thing I heard about him was from Greer, about 2 years after graduation. Someone saw Odell working at a warehouse outside of the city. He was loading boxes onto trucks. Greer said the person who saw him almost didn't recognize him. He'd gained weight, his head was shaved, and he was wearing a reflective vest and steel-toed boots. He didn't look like the kid who argued with teachers and drove a car his parents bought him. He looked like someone who had finally met the version of the world that doesn't negotiate. I graduated, went to college, got a degree in public health. I work at a nonprofit now helping schools develop crisis response protocols. I didn't didn't plan that career path, it found me. The day I stood on that football field in 30-degree weather, watching a mother run screaming across a parking lot planted something in me that grew into the rest of my life. I thought about that day during my first college lecture. I thought about it during my internship. I thought about it when I got the job offer, and when I walked into my first school consultation and saw a secretary sitting behind a desk answering phones. I wanted to be on the other side of that, the side that builds the systems so that when the next Odell Pratt decides the rules don't apply to him, the damage is smaller and the recovery is faster, and the people who are hurt have someone standing next to them saying, we planned for this and you're going to be okay. I've worked with 37 schools so far. Every single one of them has had an Odell. Not someone who called in a threat, but someone who the entire staff could point to and say that kid is going to be a problem. The question I always ask is, what are we doing about it before it becomes the worst day this school has ever had? Most of the time the answer is not enough. I'm trying to change that. I looked up Waverly a few months ago. She graduated a year late, but she graduated. She's studying psychology at a state university. Her focus is adolescent trauma. I sent her a message and said, I don't know if you remember me, but I was there that day too, and I just wanted to say I'm glad you made it through. She wrote back and said she remembered the football field and the cold and the sound of the sirens, and that for a long time those sounds were all she could hear when she closed her eyes. She said it took her 3 years to stop flinching when a phone rang in a quiet room. Then she said thank you for reaching out. Most people forgot. I didn't forget. None of us forgot. Some people ruin their lives for money or love or power, and you can at least trace the logic even if the logic is broken. Odell Pratt ruined his life because he didn't want to take a test. That's it. That's the whole reason. A 30% biology exam that would have taken 90 minutes and been forgotten by summer. He traded his future, his family's stability, his freedom, and the safety and peace of mind of 1,200 people for 90 minutes he didn't want to sit through. And the worst part is, I don't think he understood what he was really losing until it was already gone. Some people learn that actions have consequences when they're 5 and they touch a hot stove. Some people learn it when they're 17 and a judge reads a sentence. And some people, the Odells of the world, they learn it standing in a warehouse parking lot in a reflective vest, loading boxes at 6 in the morning, remembering the version of their life that existed before they picked up the phone. What's the most creative way a parent can ruin their kid's childhood? Every few years, my family would make sure one of us kids would go missing for exactly 47 hours. Long enough for a police report, not long enough for a full investigation. My parents would collect the ransom insurance payout, usually around $50,000. Then miraculously, we'd escape and find our way home. They called it teaching us independence. Really, it was a business model. I watched my brother Daniel do his first fraud at 8 years old. My parents left him at a rest stop 4 states away with a burner phone programmed with one number. He had to wait exactly 47 hours before calling. They collected $45,000 from their kidnapping and ransom insurance policy while he slept in a storage unit they'd pre-rented. When he finally came home, my mother hugged him for the security cameras they knew insurance investigators might check. We're just so grateful he's safe, she sobbed, mentally calculating the profit margin. One time my sister Pia panicked and called 911 after only 6 hours. No payout. My parents spent months in the basement with her teaching her about family loyalty and following instructions. She never broke protocol again. I spent years preparing for my turn, learning bus routes, memorizing which hotels didn't check ID for their lobbies, which 24-hour businesses wouldn't question a kid hanging around. My father, who worked in insurance himself, drilled me constantly. What do you say if someone asks why you're alone? I'm waiting for my mom. She's in the bathroom. What if police approach? I got separated at the mall. My parents are probably looking for me. Wrong answers meant beatings about how private school tuition didn't pay itself. Everything changed when I turned 12. Mrs. DePillo, my geography teacher, mentioned something odd while grading papers. Interesting that 3 of your cousins have gone missing and been found over the past decade. What are the odds? My blood went cold. Your cousin Liam mentioned the pattern before graduating, she continued carefully. Said he wished someone had noticed sooner. She left articles on her desk about insurance fraud, how children involved in their parents' schemes were usually placed in foster care. The information terrified me. It was 5 to 10 years imprisonment, and everyone was involved, aunts, uncles, grandparents. It was the family business. My first turn came at 13. My parents dropped me at a truck stop in Ohio with $20 and a prepaid phone. The story? I'd been grabbed at a gas station while they were inside, escaped from the kidnapper's van, found my way to safety. The insurance payout would be $75,000. They'd upgraded their policy. I lasted 36 hours in that truck stop, slept in the bathroom stalls, ate from vending machines. When a trucker asked if I needed help, I almost broke. But I knew what would happen if I ruined this. College fund gone, family reputation destroyed, the business that paid for everything ended. When I stuck to the plan, my parents took me to dinner at a nice restaurant to celebrate. You did good, my father said, sliding me an envelope with $1,000 cash. You're cut. The breaking point was my cousin Lily. She just turned 8, the minimum age my family considered safe for the scheme. But her parents were getting greedy. They'd bought a special circumstances policy that would pay out $200,000. The catch? She had to show signs of trauma for it to pay the full amount. They were planning to leave her for 72 hours. In November, in Michigan. The night before Lily's turn, I made a choice. I slipped her my old smartphone with a video saved on it. 20 minutes of me explaining everything. Insurance documents I'd photographed. News articles about kids who died in similar schemes. If you get scared, I whispered, you call 911 immediately. Tell them your parents left you there for insurance money. Tell them you want to go to a safe home. They dropped her at a rest stop the next morning. I watched them drive away, leaving their 8-year-old daughter alone in freezing weather for money. But Lily was already like them. She waited the full 72 hours. Played the traumatized victim perfectly. The insurance company paid out the full $200,000. That's when I got the text. Unknown number. We have documentation. I stare at my phone screen for 20 minutes straight. My hands shake so bad I almost drop it twice. Someone knows about the video I gave Lily. That means someone watched it. That means everything I explained about the fraud, all the insurance documents I took pictures of, all the dates and policy numbers, everything is now in someone else's hands. I delete the message and turn off my phone. My finger hovers over the power button for a second before I press it. The screen goes dark, but I know that won't make the problem go away. I shove the phone under my pillow and sit on my bed staring at the wall. My brain keeps running through possibilities. Maybe it's someone from Lily's family who found the phone. Maybe it's a teacher who saw something. Maybe it's someone way worse. I don't know which option scares me more. At dinner that night, my parents pop open a bottle of champagne. They're celebrating Lily's successful return and the $200,000 payout. My mother laughs about how perfect the timing was. My father raises his glass and talks about family loyalty. Every smile at the table feels like a mask. I wonder if the person who texted me is watching our house right now. Maybe they're sitting in a car down the street taking pictures of us through the window. I push roast chicken around my plate with my fork. The food tastes like nothing. My mother asks if I'm feeling okay. I tell her I'm fine, just have a lot of homework. She nods and goes back to discussing investment strategies with my father. I excuse myself early and head upstairs. My legs feel weird walking up the steps, like they might give out. In my room, I close the door and lean against it. I turn my phone back on and watch the screen light up. 3 more messages from the unknown number pop up immediately. The first one asks if I got their message. The second one says they need to talk to me. The third one says this is important and I shouldn't ignore them. My stomach twists into a knot. I realize ignoring them won't work. They'll just keep texting or maybe do something worse. I type out a response asking who they are. I delete it. I type something else asking what they want. I delete that too. I go through 5 different versions before I settle on something that sounds normal. I just type, "Who is this?" and hit send before I can change my mind again. The response comes back in seconds. My phone buzzes and I nearly throw it across the room. The message says there's someone who saw my video to Lily, the one explaining the insurance fraud, the one with policy numbers and dates. My vision gets blurry for a second. I have to blink a few times to clear it. That means they have specific details, not just guesses or suspicions. They know exactly what I told Lily. They probably have copies of the documents I showed her. I type back asking what they want from me. My hands are shaking again and I have to retype the message 3 times to fix the spelling mistakes. They reply that they want to meet in person to talk about options for everyone involved. The words make me feel trapped. I'm stuck between being scared of my family finding out and being curious about who this person is. What if they're trying to help? What if they're trying to set me up? I don't know what to do, so I text back that I'll only do texts, no calls, no meetings yet. They say okay, and that they'll be in touch. The next 2 days are awful. I barely sleep at all. Every time my phone buzzes, I jump. Every notification sound makes my heart race. I check my messages about 100 times even when I know there's nothing new. My parents notice something is wrong. I'm distracted at breakfast. I'm quiet at dinner. I forget to do my chores. My father corners me after school on Wednesday. He asks if I'm having second thoughts about family business. His voice sounds calm, but his eyes look hard. I tell him I'm fine, just stressed about a history test coming up. He stares at me for a long time before he nods and walks away. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Thursday morning, the unknown number sends a photo. It's a document, a claim form from one of Daniel's early frauds. I can see my parents' signatures at the bottom. The date is from 6 years ago. They have access to actual insurance records. This isn't just someone who found my video on Lily's phone. This is someone official, someone who works for an insurance company or the government or something. I spend the whole day at the school thinking about it. In study hall, I use the library computer to research insurance fraud investigations. I learn about special investigation units that insurance companies have. They're the people who catch fraud. They have access to all the claim records and can see patterns across different policies. I realize I might be talking to someone whose job is catching people like my family. That night, I text them directly. I ask if they work for an insurance company. They confirm they're with an SIU. They say they're looking into weird patterns and kidnapping and ransom claims. They know about at least 7 times my family has done this over the past 10 years. They say I'm not their target. They say I could help stop this from happening to more kids. My first thought is to protect my family. I know that sounds crazy after everything, but they're still my family. I text back that I can't help them. There's a long pause before they respond. They say Lily is already scheduled for another turn next month. They say they saw it in emails they got access to. The thought of Lily going through that again makes me feel sick. I run to the bathroom and throw up. My mother knocks on the door asking if I'm okay. I tell her I think I ate something bad. I lean against the cold tile floor and think about 8-year-old Lily spending another 72 hours alone in the cold. I think about the fake trauma becoming real trauma. I think about more kids getting pulled into this as they turn 8. I wipe my mouth and stand up. I look at myself in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. I walk back to my room and close the door. My phone sits on my desk where I left it. I pick it up and stare at the messages from the unknown number. The next morning, I start watching everything differently. There's a gray sedan parked down our street that I've never noticed before. It's still there when I leave for school. It's there again when I get home. The third day I see it, my hands start shaking. I don't know if my family hired someone to watch me or if it's the investigator keeping tabs. Either way, it means someone is paying attention to what I do. At the school, I catch myself staring at my teachers during classes. I'm trying to figure out who might help if I needed it. Mrs. Apillo notices me watching her during geography and asks if everything is okay. I shake my head and say I'm fine, but I make a mental note that she's already seen the pattern once with my cousins. She might be someone safe. My phone buzzes during lunch. The investigator texts that they get why I'm scared but asks if I'll meet them one time in public during the day. They suggest the main library downtown on Saturday afternoon. I don't reply, but I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I close my eyes, I see that library. I imagine walking in. I imagine what might happen. Thursday night, my mother calls a family meeting for Sunday. My chest gets tight and I feel like I can't breathe properly. These meetings always mean something bad. Either someone messed up or they're planning something new. I text the investigator asking what happens if I meet them. Do I have to decide anything right away? They text back fast. They say no pressure. Just information about what options exist and what protections are available. They mention that kids who cooperate often get immunity deals. That word sticks in my head. Immunity. It means I wouldn't go to jail for the frauds I helped with. It means I might actually have a way out of this. Friday night, I pull out a backpack and start packing. I put in clothes, some cash I've been saving, the burner phone from my own fraud. I find a list of youth shelter addresses online and print it out. I hide everything in the back of my closet under some boxes. Just knowing I have an escape plan makes me feel a little bit better. Like I have some control over what happens next. Saturday morning, I tell my parents I need to go to the library for a group project. My father says he'll drive me. My stomach drops, but I can't say no without making him suspicious. He pulls up to the library and watches me walk through the front doors. I can feel his eyes on my back the whole way. I find a study room in the back corner and sit down. My hands won't stop shaking. I don't know if I'm actually going to go through with this meeting. A man walks up to my study room. He's maybe 40 years old, wearing a button-up shirt and khakis. He shows me a badge from an insurance company. His name is Stephen Combs, and he works for the Special Investigation Unit. He sits down across from me and thanks me for coming. His voice is quiet and calm. He pulls out some papers from a folder. They're printed screenshots from my video to Lily. I can see the exact frames where I'm explaining the insurance fraud scheme. He's seen the whole thing. Every word I said. Every document I showed her. Stephen starts explaining that his unit has been watching weird patterns in kidnapping and ransom policies for 2 years now. My family's claims stood out because of how precise everything was. Always exactly 47 hours. Always successful escapes. Never any actual ransom demands made to police. He says the patterns are too clean, too perfect. He says they need someone on the inside to testify and help build a criminal case. I ask him what happens to kids who testify against their families. Stephen doesn't lie to me. He says it's complicated. Most kids end up in foster care or with other relatives who weren't involved. He says some families try to get revenge. He can't promise that I'll be completely safe. But he can promise that if we keep doing the frauds, eventually everyone will get caught anyway. And when that happens, the consequences will be way worse than if I cooperate now. Stephen reaches into his messenger bag and pulls out a business card with his name and a phone number printed in plain black text. He slides it across the table to me, along with a cheap prepaid phone still in its plastic packaging. He tears open the package and shows me that his number is already programmed as the only contact. He tells me I don't have to decide anything today, but if I want to help, I should document whatever I can safely access. He mentions a detective named Reese Gibson who works the criminal investigation side and might want to talk to me eventually. I take the card and phone and shove them deep into my backpack where nobody will see them. Stephen stands up and says to be careful, and to reach out if I feel unsafe at any point. He walks out of the study room first, and I wait 5 minutes before leaving so we're not seen together. I walk out of the library into the afternoon sun, and everything feels different now. I know what's coming and I know I have a choice to make. The family meeting is tomorrow and I have no idea what they're planning to announce. My father is still sitting in his car in the parking lot waiting for me. I climb in and he asks if my project went well. I tell him it went fine and we drive home in silence. The rest of Saturday drags by in a blur of homework and dinner and pretending everything is normal. I spend most of the evening in my room staring at Stephen's business card and turning the prepaid phone over in my hands. The weight of it feels huge even though it's just a cheap plastic rectangle. I hide both items in a box at the back of my closet under some old stuffed animals nobody ever touches. Sunday morning arrives and my mother calls everyone to the dining room for the family meeting. My parents sit at the head of the table looking pleased about something. My father announces they bought a new insurance policy with better coverage and a higher payout. $100,000 for a successful recovery. Everyone around the table starts clapping like this is good news. My mother explains they're planning my next turn for winter break, which gives me 3 months to prepare properly. My aunt says this is such a great opportunity, and my uncle jokes about how I'll be able to pay for my first year of college with my cut. Pia smiles at me from across the table, and Daniel nods his approval. I sit there feeling sick to my stomach while everyone congratulates me like I just won some kind of award. My father goes over the basic timeline and says we'll start detailed planning in a few weeks. The meeting ends and everyone goes back to their normal Sunday activities like we didn't just plan a crime. That night, I wait until everyone is asleep before pulling out the prepaid phone Stephen gave me. My hands shake as I type out a message telling him about the new policy and the winter break timeline. I hit send and then sit there staring at the screen waiting for a response. It comes through within 10 minutes. Stephen says this gives us time to build a proper case, but he asks if I'm safe at home. I stare at that question for a long time trying to figure out how to answer it. My family has never physically hurt me beyond the basement punishments for breaking protocol, but I don't feel safe either. I feel trapped and watched and like one wrong move could ruin everything. I text back that I'm okay for now and he responds, telling me to reach out immediately if that changes. I delete the conversation and hide the phone again before trying to sleep. Monday morning, I walk into school feeling exhausted and anxious. During second period, I ask for a hall pass and head to the guidance office. I tell the secretary I need to talk to someone about stress management. She schedules me with Sally Nguyen, who has a free period right now. Sally is younger than most of the other counselors and students say she actually listens instead of just lecturing. I sit down in her small office with its motivational posters and comfortable chairs. Sally asks what's going on, and I carefully explain that I'm worried about a family situation that might not be legal. I don't give her details, but I make it clear that I'm looking for information about my options. Sally leans forward and explains mandatory reporting laws in a gentle but serious voice. She tells me that if I disclose abuse or criminal activity involving minors, she is required by law to report it to authorities. The information makes my chest tight because I'm not ready for that level of intervention yet. But Sally also gives me a list of resources, including anonymous tip lines and youth legal services, where I can get advice without triggering reports. She writes down several phone numbers and website addresses on a piece of paper and hands it to me. She says her door is always open whenever I'm ready to talk more, and that I'm not alone in whatever I'm dealing with. I thank her and leave her office feeling slightly less trapped than before. That week, my father searches my room while I'm at the school, and I know because my hidden bag has been moved slightly from where I left it. Nothing is missing from the bag, which means he was checking to see what I had rather than taking it away. The violation makes me angry in a way I haven't felt before. This is my space, and he has no right to go through my things looking for evidence that I might betray the family. I want to confront him, but I know that would only make things worse. Instead, I move my important items to a new hiding spot behind a loose board in my closet that I discovered years ago. I put the prepaid phone and Stephen's card in there along with the cash I've been saving. I use the prepaid phone to text Stephen asking what kind of evidence would actually help his investigation. He responds with a detailed list. Insurance documents showing the policies and claims. Family communications about planning the schemes like emails or text messages. Financial records proving the payouts went to my parents. Testimony about how everything was planned and executed. I read through his list and realized that most of these documents are in my father's home office safe. I've seen him open it before and I know the combination because I watched him enter it once when he didn't know I was standing in the hallway. Getting into that safe would be risky, but possible if I had the right opportunity. Wednesday night, my mother leaves for her book club meeting, and my father has to work late at the office. That leaves me home alone with Daniel, who is supposed to be watching me even though I'm old enough not to need a babysitter. We order pizza and eat it in front of the television. During a commercial break, I ask my brother if he ever thinks about what we're doing and if it bothers him. Daniel looks uncomfortable and shifts in his seat. He says it's just how our family works and that everyone does it. But his eyes tell a different story. I can see doubt there even if he won't say it out loud. I push a little harder and ask if he ever wanted to tell someone or get help. Daniel goes quiet for a long moment. Then he admits that he tried to tell a teacher once when he was 10 years old. But my father found out somehow, and Daniel spent a week in the basement learning about family loyalty. His voice is flat when he talks about it like he's describing something that happened to someone else. He says he learned that survival means compliance, and that fighting the system only makes things worse. I realize in that moment that my whole family is trapped by fear and learned behavior. The system works because everyone is too scared to break it and too used to it to see how wrong it is. Daniel and I finish our pizza in silence, and I understand that I'm probably the only one who might actually have the courage to end this. The next night, I wait until I hear the shower running upstairs before I move. My mother always takes long showers, at least 20 minutes, and I've been planning this for days. I grab her purse from the kitchen counter and find her key ring buried at the bottom under receipts and gum wrappers. My hands are steady as I pull out the small brass key labeled office in my father's neat handwriting. I watched a YouTube video 3 times about making wax impressions using a candle and a bar of soap. The tutorial made it look easy, but doing it for real feels different. I press the key firmly into the softened wax, making sure to get both sides. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it. The whole thing takes maybe 2 minutes, but it feels like an hour. I hide the wax impression in my closet behind the loose board, and wait 3 days for the right moment to actually use it. Friday afternoon, both my parents have meetings that run late, and Daniel has basketball practice.